Hello, everybody, and welcome to one of our nuggets in this new little series. We call it the Coffee Talk mini-series, and it's the fast track to the compliance with the EU directive. And in this mini-series, we are discussing, Margaret and I, about certain pieces so that you make sure that you know what the EU directive is about. That's coming up. And we have guest speakers. And I'm very proud that today, for one of these important topics, I'm joined by Leah. And Leah, why do you think you're here? Who are you? What's your main topic, sort of?
Yes, who am I? That's a very philosophical question, Henrike. But let me start with the formalities. So my name is Leah Lønsted. I am head of rewards transformation in Danske Bank, which is, well, one of the largest banks in Denmark. That means I'm responsible for our pay transparency efforts and pay transparency programs. I'm also part of the FPI screening board, and I've been part of that for what, 3, 4 years, 5 years now? I think I've been working with pay equity, pay transparency, etc. for the last 5, 6 years. So so I'm super happy to be part of this conversation.
That's cool. And there's so much about this EU directive around. So we are spanning all topics that are sort of in there, from paragraphs, not paragraphs, so-called articles 9 and 10, and internal reporting, external reporting, transparency and everything. And today with you, there's one thing that I want to cover, because I know you've for some time now in the screening board. I know where your focus lies and what you talk about. And a question we often get, or that I hope will be a good answer for those that are listening into the series, is very simple, but I know it has depth inside, is what is a pay structure, Leah?
What is a pay structure? Well, you can consider it's very foundational. So it's essentially the framework an organization would use to set and manage pay. So think of it as the architecture behind compensation. So everything that ensures that people are paid fairly, consistently, and of course in line with market practices. In a pay structure, you would have 3 main building blocks. So one is having a job architecture, and this means having clearly defined job families and job levels, and making sure that the jobs that employees perform are actually placed within this particular structure. Then you should have pay ranges as well that define what's the upper and what's the lower boundary or limit for the jobs you have in the organization. And here, of course, it's relevant to look at the market from a competitive and attractiveness perspective, but also look at your inner market to see, okay, so how do we make sure that people are actually equitably paid within those set frameworks? And then finally, a key principle, and that's also a key part of the EU directive, is to have objective gender neutral criteria. So essentially, we use those to place people within the pay ranges and in the whole pay structure. So objective key neutral criteria are critical for fairness, but they're also critical for compliance related matters. And just one more thing on that is a false positive I've seen with many organizations I've worked with also in the past, is that sometimes you think, oh, we have a job architecture, we also have pay ranges, so that must by virtue mean that we're also paying fairly. Well, actually, that is not always the case. That's what I would call a false positive, and that's where we need the objective gender neutral criteria, and we also need a bit of pay gap analysis to see, are we then actually applying the same rules for everyone? And I think that's the work we do in the screening board as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of our main things, sort of, to be so flexible in the certification, that we are flexible concerning the variables in general, those criteria. But then again, we are the ones that check, are they fair? Are they gender neutral? Are they really objective? Especially performance. Okay, we do have some fun with that. So if we now know that you can have a finished pay structure, or you can be somewhere in between, but mostly people think that they are good, that it's finished and done, why do you need to revisit the pay structure once again and again, let's say?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And I mean, a lot of companies, they have job architectures that they have probably created a while back, and at that time it most likely made a lot of sense. But we do have new regulatory requirements. We have EU requirements that go into force in June of this year. The gender neutral criteria, that's a new thing. That is something you need to make sure that you have embedded, as an example, in your pay structure. There's also a requirement around sharing pay ranges with job applicants. That's not a practice a lot of companies have today. In some countries like Lithuania, it's a requirement, but across the board, across EU, it's not a common practice. And then finally, there's also a requirement to be much more transparent, and actually employees, they will have a right to understand how they are paid and how that compares to others in similar roles. Again, that's a new right that that's new to a lot of companies across the EU. So, and that's just on the regulatory side. Other aspects are you want to make sure you have internal equity, because with this new level of transparency, you want to make sure that you can actually defend your structure and you can explain it to employees. We also see that there's an increase, and interestingly, that actually cuts across generations, but I've also seen that there's an increase in employee expectations. So employees also expect companies to be more transparent. They do expect more fairness and transparency as well. That's also something we see in the market. So some of the companies I've worked with in the past who were sort of front runners in this are very explicit, and they use it as part of their talent attraction strategy, their level of transparency. And then finally, coming back to the regulatory requirements, there's also a requirement to publicize your gender pay gap. And also, if it exceeds 5% at sort of a workers category level, you have to show your remediation efforts. Well, you have to close the gap, but you also have to show the remediation efforts publicly and at a more detailed level internally as well. So there's also a drive, and I think that should be a good incentive to get started on it, to make sure that the structure actually supports all of this work that's ahead of us.
Oh, that's cool, because I also think revisiting also means, in my view, I think the pay structure is one thing, but the people in there is another thing. And if you hire people, new people, and people go and things happen, everything is sort of in the move. It would be so crazy to not revisit it. But I mean, I prefer, of course, your broad explanation on that. But I always think, how can you not revisit something, anything that you do once in a while, to make sure that it's still up to date, still good, and so on? And you talked a little bit already about the necessities about communication, but how would you actually communicate a pay structure? Is there anything where you would say this is special or important to make sure that what you communicate or how you communicate it actually leads to the understanding at the level of the people that need to understand it?
Yeah. So I think this is an area where, I mean, as with any large transformational topic or program, you need to think change management in from the beginning. So think about who are the recipients, who are subject to this change. And actually, when it comes to pay, it's all of your employees. This is relevant for everyone, but everyone is not a trained compensation specialist. So I think us in the compensation community, we have to think really hard about how do we convey, how do we explain, how do we share this in a meaningful manner without using too much comp and ben lingo. So that's just the underlying foundation. But what I would say in concrete terms is, make the criteria and ranges accessible. It is actually also an EU directive that you should make these objective gender neutral criteria available for your employees. But you can communicate that proactively by saying, hey, these are the criteria, this is how they apply, and these are some examples. Then you can consider making pay ranges available. And I know for some companies that's super scary, because they think, oh my God, is that going to lead to inflation in pay? And yes, if you have employees who are very, very skilled at negotiating and managers who are not, it may. But it might be the other way around. It might be that if you make solid explanations, you base it on neutral objective criteria, which makes sense, it might actually not have this inflationary impact. It's not a requirement to make pay ranges or what people are individually paid available to everyone else. That's not a requirement at all, and that's not the objective of the EU directive either. But it is an objective, and it is a requirement to make pay ranges available for candidates who apply for a job. So what you can consider in your organization is, do we also want to make pay ranges available to existing employees and thereby sort of equal the playing field for both candidates coming from the outside and existing employees to better manage expectations and to sort of make the same information available. And then in addition to that, I mean, this is not just an HR exercise, it's also a matter of equipping your leaders, having your leaders on board, making sure that they can have confident conversations. That probably takes a few rounds, and also includes, you know, maybe some training in how do I avoid being triggered by uncomfortable conversations as a leader, for example. And then finally, use multiple channels. Don't just do a PowerPoint or one sort of training or town hall. Use multiple channels. Don't be afraid of yes, both PowerPoints and town halls, etc. But do bit-sized videos like this one, you know, maximum 3 minutes. Think in TikTok, you know, so it's easy for people to see and they can find the information that they're looking for.
Yeah, cool. No, very good. I like that. It's really so important. And to make it, well, 3 minutes, not today, not this one. This one is a little bit longer, but not that long. So it's fine, I think. And I hope it's a good nugget for the content of the EU directive. And that once we finished, once you listening in have sort of seen all nuggets around the EU directive, are very well prepared. And thank you, Lea, for coming in with the pay structure, very important topic. And I look forward to seeing you on another round, on another coffee talk. Maybe that's not this series, but a general one. We'll find some topics.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure being here with you, Henrike.
Thank you, Lea. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.